Good evening there, everybody. What is happening? Hopefully, y'all are having a wonderful day today. So, when it comes down to it, I thought, of course, that I would talk about this video that I found to be very particularly interesting. And this is going to be a video and a subject over that of Mr. Saul Canelo Alvarez, where, in my view, he's still one of the top pound for pound fighters in the world. And even if you were to debate him as the #1 pound for pound fighter on your pound for pound list or the best all around fighter in boxing, I can't really have a huge problem with it because he is an extraordinarily skilled fighter. And on top of that, he's just beaten so many A-grade level names throughout 4 different weight classes throughout the past 10 plus years. But Canelo Alvarez right now, I'm not going to say that he's necessarily at a crossroads, but in a way he kind of is at a crossroads at this point in time in his career. I think he's 33, 34 years old, but he's probably, in terms of the amount of wear and tear that he's had on his body, and on top of that, for how long he's been fighting now for over 18 years, starting this year. Canelo Alvarez, it might be soon time for him to retire. I'm not necessarily sure, but of course, there's at least one big mega fight for Canelo Alvarez before he leaves out of boxing. And in my view, he's going to have to take that fight before he ends up retiring in his career. And that, of course, is going to be that of the David Benavidez fight. The David Benavidez fight is the fight that now everyone is basically asking to see. And I think that that fight is going to be required. And I think that Canelo Alvarez more than likely realizes that. Now, do I believe that Canelo is going to fight that of David Benavidez in May? I don't think he's going to fight him in May. I think that if he's going to fight David Benavidez, then more than likely it's either going to be later on this year in September, or it's going to be early on, next year, sometime in May or somewhere around there. I think that's pretty much what Canelo Alvarez's plans are. I think that, he pretty much plans to juice up the fight and, overall to get a win against one or two more very good to great contenders before he fights that guy that he knows is going to be potentially the biggest threat to him within that weight division. And if we're just going to talk about both Canelo Alvarez and David Benavidez's skill sets, I don't think that David Benavidez is the skilled fighter that Canelo Alvarez is, or at least I don't think that he has quite the skill set that Canelo Alvarez has when Canelo was at his best. But Canelo, even in the Jermell Charlo fight, Canelo doesn't quite look the same Canelo Alvarez that I've seen from a few years ago. I still think that he's a great fighter, and I still think that he's an A to A plus level fighter. But I don't see the same Canelo Alvarez, in my view, that I seen once upon a time, at least when he was fighting Gennady Golovkin and Danny Jacobs, and when he was fighting, Caleb Plant and some of those other guys. Even against Jermell Charlo, I thought that he looked a little bit slower. I thought that he looked a little bit more sluggish. He looked a lot better, of course, than what he had previously in his past couple of fights, because he probably took it a bit more seriously, and on top of that, trained a little bit harder. But we'll have to see what he does potentially against that of David Benavidez. But the question is about Canelo Alvarez right now is that can a Canelo Alvarez that seems to be at a 90 or 85% version of himself of what he used to be, is that going to be good enough to defeat a David Benavidez that is getting better by each and every single fight, and on top of that is naturally bigger than him, has decent athleticism, and is probably about 1.5 to 2 weight classes bigger than him? And I know a lot of people are going to say, what are you talking about? They fight in the same weight class, right? But David Benavidez, at the end of the day, when you take a look at him, he easily could be fighting at the light heavyweight division. He's the biggest 168-pounder there. I don't think that there's really any discussion about it. And when you talk about Canelo, he's not really a natural 168-pounder. The man is 5'8", somewhere around there, possibly even shorter, with a 71-inch arm reach. And, he's a bit girthier and thicker for his size. But he's pretty much like, maybe a little bit bigger than a natural middleweight. That's what Canelo Alvarez is. So once again, that's why, this fight is going to be very intriguing if it does end up happening this year, and hopefully it does. Because in my view, Canelo Alvarez, he's going to really have no other choice but to fight David Benavidez very soon, or deal with a lot of the shame and embarrassment from a lot of the fans when they're going to basically hurl the criticism at him. And it would be somewhat deserved, because at the end of the day, David Benavidez is the main fighter that right now you need to fight. Before, I didn't necessarily mind when the David Benavidez fight didn't happen, or even the Jermall Charlo or Andrade fights didn't happen, because Charlo and Andrade, in my view, never really separated themselves too heavily, in my view, from that of a Billy Joe Saunders and that of a Caleb Plant. A lot of people disagreed, but when you take a look at it, their accomplishments and their skill sets are probably all around the same. But when you take a look at David Benavidez, now that he ended up getting the win over Caleb Plant in a very competitive fashion, but still ended up getting a win over him, and then took out the undefeated Demetrius Bubu Andrade, or Andrade, someone who, of course, had been, possibly wanting that Canelo Alvarez fight for many, many years. Now that David Benavidez had took out those fighters and he took out Andrade so dominantly, at least in the second part of that fight of the 6 rounds that it ended up lasting, well, Canelo Alvarez is going to have no choice but to fight that of David Benavidez. Now, the rumor is apparently that Canelo Alvarez just might fight that of Jaime Munguia in his next fight, which I don't think is the worst fight. I don't think that it's as good as the David Benavidez fight. But like I said months ago, I don't believe that Canelo Alvarez is going to fight David Benavidez in his next fight. I think that he very likely could fight him in September of this year, but I don't think that he's going to fight him for his next fight. I think that he's going to try to build up that fight a little bit more. I think that he's going to try to get a tune-up in a little bit more and get a little bit more experience and then fight that of David Benavidez and really try and approach that monster to see once again if he can slay that dragon just like he did before against Gennady Golovkin and some other fighters. And Canelo is still a very great fighter at this point in time in his career, so he still could very potentially do it. But just with the aging that I've seen Canelo Alvarez kind of go through a little bit within his past recent fights, the fight is more even than once upon a time what I thought it was going to be. So once again, it's just a very interesting conversation. And of course, the conversation also is that is the Jaime Munguia fight good for Canelo Alvarez, and is it also good for boxing? But we're going to talk about that as this video goes along, and we'll have to see what Mr. Boxing Ego has to say. But let's get into it. Let's see what happens.
Hey, get the payday. You want payday? I know that. Canelo Alvarez could fight none other than Jaime Munguia. Cinco de Mayo. What? I thought Canelo didn't want to fight any fighters that had and shared the same flag. I want to talk about...
And what I will say is this. If Canelo Alvarez, if he's a guy that stated that, and I believe he did state that he didn't really want to fight any fighters from Mexico. And what I took that as was that, he wanted to give them room to kind of grow and, overall become champions of their own because he had already done enough and he didn't want to take away, the spotlight from other Mexican fighters. But if he's going to be willing to fight Jaime Munguia and he refuses to fight David Benavidez within his next, 2 to 3 fights, somewhere around there, then of course it's going to look very bad on Canelo Alvarez. And of course the question would be, well then why would you be willing to face Jaime Munguia and not David Benavidez? And Canelo Alvarez knows, and he's always shown me in the past, doesn't mean that it's not going to end up differently this time. Who knows? You never know. But Canelo has always shown me in the past that eventually he realizes when a fight needs to be made. And that's why I believe that Canelo is eventually going to fight that of David Benavidez next, because I don't think that he really has much of a choice. But we'll see what happens. And, I also wanted to talk about this video as well, because I made a video about that of Gervonta Tank Davis the other day, allegedly cherry picking, when he, I didn't really say that he cherry picked myself, but I did say that he fought an opponent that in my view was not a great quality, and that of William Zepeda. And of course, I had a lot of Gervonta Tank Davis fans, in my comment section saying that, oh, you don't know what you're talking about. Gervonta Tank Davis is already an all-time great. When it comes down to it, you get in the boxing ring and let's see how long you last. When it comes down to it, he's in charge of his own career. He can fight whoever he wants. He's making money. All the stupid bullshit that fanboys and fangirls always respond with, which has nothing to do with the fucking conversation, has nothing, makes no damn sense whatsoever. And if you want to, have those standards, then cool, no problem. If you want to have those standards, then, that's all on you. But then also have those same standards when Canelo Alvarez doesn't fight someone like a David Benavidez when you want him to fight David Benavidez. Also have those same standards when Tyson Fury doesn't want to fight Alexander Usyk or, someone overall like that. Have those same standards. Be like that when Vasily Lomachenko didn't want to fight that at Devin Haney. Have those same standards and say, you know what, they're in charge of their career. They're pound for pound level fighters. They're making money. They've already proved enough. They can fight whoever they want to, because they've already proved enough for us. So once again, if you're gonna have that energy with Gervonta Tank Davis, no problem whatsoever. Have that same energy across the board. But like I said, not a lot of people do. But once again, Canelo Alvarez has always shown me that he's usually willing to get in the ring with whoever, that he needs to get in the ring with, and that he's willing to get in the ring with a bunch of different A-grade level fighters, all the way from Billy Joe Saunders to Caleb Plant to Callum Smith to Danny Jacobs to Araceli Lara to Austin Trout, to that of Dmitry Bivol, to that of Sergey the Crusher Kovalev, Gennady Golovkin, Miguel Cotto, and I'm sure there's a couple of other fighters that I'm missing, Araceli Lara, all those fighters, and he won the majority of those fights that I just mentioned. So Canelo Alvarez, he's always shown me that he's willing to step it up, in terms of the level of competition. And he is going to have to fight David Benavidez, no doubt about it. If it isn't his next fight, it's going to have to be the fight right after that. Because if he doesn't fight David Benavidez, it is, in my view, going to be a cherry pick, or at least is going to be looked at as him ducking David Benavidez.
This video. Canelo Alvarez, wow. He seemingly has done it again. There's new reports out, new videos that you guys can find on social media where Canelo Alvarez, big name in boxing, they're saying that he's had...
This is why I also say that Canelo Alvarez, when you take a look at him and a lot of these guys, they love to, especially from the LDBC and new media channels, they love to criticize Canelo Alvarez so much. Listen, Canelo Alvarez, when it comes down to it, he's a thicker guy and he's a girthier guy. But when you take a look at him against some of these fighters like Caleb Plant and some of these 168 or even 160 pounders, he's not as big as some of these guys, man. Like, when you take a look at him right there against Caleb Plant, like Caleb Plant, clearly is, taller and, he's lengthier. I mean, you could debate maybe who's stockier, but at the end of the day, once again, that's why I say, like, a lot of people don't really understand the impressive accomplishments of Canelo Alvarez. The fact for him to be 5'7", or 5'8", however tall he is, with a 71-inch arm reach, and the fact that he went from 154 to 175 to become a legit champion in every single one of those weight divisions. And you have guys like Boxing Eagle and all sorts of bullshit saying that, oh, I can't even put Canelo above Marco Antonio Barrera and Eric Morales in terms of the all-time Mexican greats. Like, all that is just a bunch of bullshit. Like, it is what it is. But they do that with any fighter that they realize might eventually have a potential to be remembered in terms of the all-time great conversation. Like I said, that's what the LDBC and new media's worst fear is. That's why whenever it comes to a fighter like Lomachenko, Canelo, Inoue, Usyk, someone like that, they have to try to tear them down immediately. They cannot have them remembered as the #1 pound-for-pound fighter of their era or the best fighter of their era. They cannot have that.
Talks with Jaime Munguia's team for a potential Cinco de Mayo opportunity for Munguia in a fight, right? Now, this is not, clearly is not the worst of Canelo fights because he's fought guys like Rocky Fielding and Callum Smith and guys who didn't have any type of profile in America, and yet they still were.
Well, in my view, Callum Smith was not the worst fight. It's just that Callum Smith was not a guy that was super popular in America. But Callum Smith was a real deal contender for that weight class, even against Artur Beterbiev in his most recent fight. He somewhat gave Artur Beterbiev a tough time. He was even backing up Artur Beterbiev in some of the moments in that fight. Maybe one could even debate that he won, a round against that Artur Beterbiev if you wanted to. I would have to watch the fight maybe a bit closer. But like I said, Callum Smith, he's a little bit of a one-dimensional fighter, but he's a guy, especially at the 168-pound weight division, he was very dangerous. He had I believe, the Super WBA, championship belt for a reason. He won the Super 6 Series tournament there. Not against the most talented lot in my view, but still he was able to do it. And then on top of that, he was the Ring Magazine champion. So let's just not sit here and act like Callum Smith was just this complete bum. Because had Andrade or had David Benavidez, beat that at Callum Smith, we all know what they'd be saying.
Given these opportunities versus Canelo, guys like John Ryder, that was probably the...
Now, John Ryder, Rocky Fielding, those two guys, in my view, were not A grade level fighters. Those were guys that, in my view, those guys were B, to C grade level fighters. John Ryder, I'll give him the level of B. But, as for, Rocky Fielding, for me, a C.
Most recent UK guy.
And, of course, Avni Yildirim.
He fought. So, don't get it twisted. Fight is not the worst thing out there. There's lesser fights in boxing. And commercially, it may even do well. Jaime Munguia is young. They're both Spanish-speaking. Jaime Munguia has called out Canelo Alvarez for quite some time, and he's undefeated. So, based on the Hispanic market that follows boxing, you might be able to do some numbers with this. Now, Canelo Alvarez...
This is just my personal view of it. If you were going to ask me how much of a threat is Jaime Munguia to that of Canelo Alvarez, and I'm a very blunt and I'm a very honest person. I always have been, at least when it comes to this channel. I don't beat around the bush no matter which fighter it is. You know, and I said this very similarly about Gervonta Tank Davis. Like Gervonta Tank Davis, he's fighting some of these, you know, these contenders like William Zepeda and Mario Barrios and Isaac Pitbull Cruz, where, you know, on paper, if you don't really know what you're looking at, and if you don't know boxing that much, you know, where you can say, oh, well, those guys are super dangerous and those guys are A-grade level contenders, you know, when it comes down to the, and at the end of the day, they're just not. Mario Barrios is not really an A-grade level fighter. He never has been. He's relatively talented, but he's not an A-grade level fighter. Isaac Pitbull Cruz has never been an A-grade level fighter. And that was that was shown, you know, in his fight not too long ago, where he damn near lost against someone that I don't even personally remember who the dude's name was, you know, or what the guy's name was. But you know, when it came down to it, and then also with Rolly Romero, I mean, come on, we all know that he's not an A-grade level fighter. So, you know, the boxing ego, for example, he always tries to spin you this bullshit whenever it comes to his favorite fighters about, you know, how their accomplishments mean that much more, and, you know, oh, they're fighting this guy and that guy. But then whenever it comes to a fighter that he doesn't like Canelo Alvarez, you know, then all of a sudden, you know, he's much more, you know, brutally honest, you know, and then all of a sudden he's much more real, or, you know, he's much more, you know, criticizing, you know. So it is what it is. And listen, at the end of the day, if you were to ask my opinion, Jaime Munguia, I would say that he's probably an A- level fighter, just because of the size and the power, you know, and the possible threat that he could be. I think he might even be potentially a little bit bigger than Canelo Alvarez, but at the end of the day, do I believe that Jaime Munguia is anything above an A- level fighter? No, I don't. Jaime Munguia, in my view, is just way too, you know, I'm not going to say unskilled, but or not skilled, but he's just, you could tell that he's not completely cooked as a fighter. And to be honest with you, I don't know if he's ever going to be a guy or a fighter that is ever going to be a super technically sound fighter. I think that he's trying to improve with each and every single fight, but I think that he's pretty much a brawler. I think that he's always going to be a brawler. I think that he relies way too much on his size and his power, and he's clearly not on the same level as Canelo Alvarez. Now, in my view, this is a better fight, you know, for Canelo than, say, what the Mario Barrios or what the Rolly Romero or Isaac Pitbull Cruz fights were for that of Gervonta Tank Davis. Because at least what I can say about Jaime Munguia is that he's been a legitimate champion, and he's beaten former champions, I believe, or at least some of the, you know, decent contenders. I can't say that about some of the other fighters, you know, that Gervonta Tank Davis fought. But at the end of the day, you know, at least when he fought them. But, you know, when it comes down to it, I still do not believe that Jaime Munguia is an A to A plus level fighter. I'll give him A minus. But if I'm going to go there, just in my view, I would probably have to say that I thought that Billy Joe Saunders and Caleb Plant were both bigger threats than Jaime Munguia, just because I think that their boxing ability is better. Sure, I don't think that they have the same level of power, but what is that power really going to bring you when I think that you're a little bit too wild and a little bit too inexperienced against that A-grade level competition? And I just don't think that you have the same level of boxing IQ. But Canelo, in my view, he knows that this fight might do well with the numbers. It's going to be Mexico versus Mexico, and it might set it up even bigger for the David Benavidez fight. So I don't mind this fight at all. I think that it's a very good fight on paper. Do I think that Jaime Munguia really stands much of a chance against Canelo, at least at the best version of himself? No. No, personally, I don't. But, you know, it still is a decent fight, and at least you could say that it's another A- level name or A-grade name that Canelo has on his resume if you wanted to go that far.
Alvarez, he hasn't really said much about fighting Munguia. Furthermore, Munguia has an upcoming fight this week against John Ryder. Now, this is going to be a weren't anticipating the fight or you forgot about the fight. Here's your reminder. But in addition, you might want to watch if you're watching this video because that face looked crazy.
There was that picture of Sergey Derevyanchenko. I can't remember how Jaime Munguia versus Sergey Derevyanchenko ended up. Remember when the LDBC and new media was trying to hype up Sergey Derevyanchenko to say that Canelo Alvarez was avoiding Sergey Derevyanchenko, but then as soon as he beat Danny Jacobs, who just had a win over Sergey Derevyanchenko, they were saying that Danny Jacobs was washed up and all this, like like they were trying to use Sergey Derevyanchenko's name, you know, to boost up Jamal Charlo and boost up some of these other fighters. You know, but then when it came to Canelo, they would always use his name to tear him down. Like no offense against Sergey Derevyanchenko, but Sergey Derevyanchenko was a B-grade level European fighter at best. Like, had Canelo fought Sergey Derevyanchenko legitimately in one of his fights, that, in my view, would have not been a super impressive win. Because Sergey Derevyanchenko has never really been anything above a B-grade level fighter.
Crazy. That's crazy. That face, that looked crazy right there. that fight face, or it really just threw off my concentration as I'm making this video. But on Boxing Ego, I don't make mistakes. My record is perfect. So we'll move smooth on. You may want to watch Jaime Munguia versus John Ryder for two reasons mainly. One is going to be a barometer for Canelo Alvarez, because Canelo Alvarez fought the same person. So if Jaime Munguia is able to stop a guy like John Ryder, who Canelo fought in Mexico and couldn't stop, that's going to be a good statement for Munguia out of Mexico.
And remember, apparently Canelo Alvarez had calluses, you know, within that fight. So, Mr. Boxing Ego, let's give Canelo Alvarez the benefit of the doubt, right? Just like you gave the benefit of the doubt to that of Errol Spence Jr., you know? So, let's give him the benefit of the doubt, right? Just like you gave to your boy Errol Spence Jr.
And Oscar De La Hoya has talked about this as well, where if you beat the guy and, you know, he shows resilience and stuff, and then somebody who's not supposed to be on your level comes...
Once again, I've already stated this, and I've had certain people that have argued with me about this. When we talk about the Canelo Alvarez versus Oscar De La Hoya debate, people can debate me all the living long damn day. People can tell me this. Canelo Alvarez is a greater fighter and a better fighter than what Oscar De La Hoya ever was. And I know a lot of people are going to come after me and say, what are you talking about? You don't know what you're talking about. Oscar De La Hoya was a great fighter, no doubt about it. First ballot Hall of Famer. But a lot of the times when he started moving up in weight, especially in some of those bigger 50-50 matchups, Sugar Shane Mosley, Felix Tito Trinidad, even against Ike Quartey, and against some of those other fighters, there's a reason why he either damn near lost those fights or he lost almost against every single A-grade fighter that he ever fought. At least with Canelo, what I could take a look at and say, you know what? He beat Danny Jacobs. He beat Gennady Golovkin in that rematch. He beat Arasani Lara. You know, he beat, you know, that. And I'm not saying that Canelo has not had his close calls. Like against, you know, Gennady in the first fight where I actually thought that he lost. And, of course, in the Lara fight where you could have debated that it could have won either way. But De La Hoya clearly lost some of the bigger fights when he started moving up in weight, like against Mayweather, you know, or like against Sugar Shane Mosley in the first fight, you know, kind of blew some of those latter rounds against Felix Tito Trinidad by moving around too much and not throwing enough. So it is what it is.
Back in a few fights and stops him, you know, that'll be a good statement. To my knowledge, John Ryder has since the Canelo fight. Upon further review, I was 1,000% right. Saul Alvarez, this is when he fought him. He was 58, 2-2. He fought him last year, Cinco de Mayo, John Ryder, and then you see the very next fight, nearly, you know, 8 months or so, he's fighting Jaime Munguia. So he's coming off of a loss and an injury, because I believe Canelo broke his nose or his jaw, one of the two. And he's fighting for the WBC silver belt versus Jaime Munguia. That's John Ryder, a southpaw from the UK. And the other thing is, John Ryder, he's game.
And let me state this. John Ryder, in my view, is not necessarily an A-grade level fighter, but that's going to be a very interesting fight. And I do think that Canelo, that especially if Jaime Munguia looks very good against John Ryder, I think that he's going to accept that fight with open arms, because I think that that's pretty much the fight that he views next that's going to really open up the greatest amount of money potential for that of him versus David Benavidez, just in my personal view. But we'll see where that goes. But let me tell you what, John Ryder's a very game fighter. He's not, in my view, quite an A-grade level fighter, but he's probably the toughest level B-grade fighter that you could fight out there in many weight divisions. He's a very game fighter. He's tough as nails. He doesn't like to quit. You know, I think he's only ever been stopped maybe once in his career, if at all, but I thought maybe he got stopped one time in his career. John Ryder's tough as nails. He's definitely a guy that's going to come to fight, you know, unless, of course, he took a paycheck to lay down, but we'll see where that goes.
It is what it is. You see it. 32-6, but he's feisty, and he knows that this is like one of his last opportunities. It's like another Munguia recent opponent in Sergey Derevyanchenko. You're not going to keep getting these big shots and big paydays in boxing unless you put on good performance. Derevyanchenko, after losing to Gennady Golovkin, yeah, no, guys, hey, Max, this is big drama, this punch, guys.
Isn't that very interesting that a lot of these guys, when they mention the Sergey Derevyanchenko versus Gennady Golovkin fight, they say, see, Gennady Golovkin was overrated this whole time. You know, he should have lost to Sergey Derevyanchenko. And that was a fight that you could have debated that Gennady Golovkin should have lost. But at the end of the day, the man was not the same fighter. The man was not the same fighter, you know, in that fight. He had not been the same fighter ever since after that Canelo Alvarez rematch. So it's like, come on, let's stop. But then when Canelo Alvarez beats him, you know, earlier when he was undefeated, oh, well, we can't count that win because Gennady Golovkin was 36 years old. You know, he was too old. So all this other bullshit. Right, so Gennady Golovkin was, you know, at the ripe age, you know, of what, 38 to 40 years old in the Sergey Derevyanchenko fight. That's when he was at his prime, but not against Canelo Alvarez. Like, get the fuck out of here.
Right?
Like I said, it just depends on the narrative that they like that day. They'll hate Gennady one day because they'll say overall that they want to say that he's the most overrated fighter of his generation, you know, to say that he lost to Canelo. But then as soon as Canelo was looked at as the best fighter of his generation, then they say, oh, well, you know, Canelo beat him when he was old. Once again, you can't have it both ways.
Into guys like him, also losing to Danny Jacobs, and then later losing to Jamal Charlo. He needed this win, but Checo, he showed enough spirit in this fight with Munguia where, you know, he might have landed another paycheck, even though he was almost stopped in this fight. But it looked like he was about to stop, or he had badly hurt Munguia as well. So he got some.
I heard from a lot of people that Sergey Derevyanchenko debatably should have won that fight. But Jaime Munguia clearly has a little bit of marketability behind him, and I think that they were trying to juice him up for someone like that of a Canelo Alvarez. And I think that his promoters know that he's only going to really go so far. So I think that them giving him to Canelo Alvarez is basically like giving that monster or that boogeyman, you know, the sacrificial lamb so he can gain a little bit of strength. You know, so once again, we'll see where this goes.
Credit there. So all in all, Jaime Munguia fighting another guy who's really nothing to lose, and they know it's probably curtains if they don't look good in this fight. So again, you may want to watch Jaime Munguia's fight coming up because one, it's a barometer test to see if Munguia in back-to-back fights can do better than Canelo did with his style. The other thing is you got to look at if Canelo's name and Munguia's name are being linked, then it's going to be all eyes on Munguia because this is just like the fight now becomes like Deontay the Bronze Bomber Wilder from Tuscaloosa, Alabama versus Joseph Parker, where you have an experienced guy who's looking to play spoiler. That was who Joseph Parker was. Parker's a former champion. Then you got John Ryder, who's an experienced guy, and he's looking to play spoiler and upset Munguia, who's definitely not Canelo Alvarez. So when you look at it, this could be a good fight.
Isn't that also very interesting that these guys love to call Gennady Golovkin or Vasily Lomachenko or Fury or Canelo, you know, hype jobs or overrated whenever they lose a fight or don't look good in a fight. But Deontay Wilder, for his whole entire career, has only ever fought 3 champions throughout his whole entire career. He lost basically all 3 fights to Tyson Fury. And then against Bermane Stiverne, he beats him. But, you know, let's be real. I mean, a lot of fighters could have beat him, you know. And I'm not trying to discredit that win, but let's be real. Bermane Stiverne, is that really the most elite level champion? And then you fight a Joseph Parker. And to be fair to Deontay Wilder, Wilder was probably not quite the same fighter either, because he had suffered a couple of knockout losses. But Joseph Parker already lost 3 times in his career, knocked out very badly against Joe Joyce just about a year and a half or a year prior, and you lose basically every single round in that fight. But yet none of these LDBC and new media channels will call Deontay Wilder a hype job or the most overrated fighter of his time.
I'm picking Munguia.
And I'm not saying that I'm saying that about Deontay Wilder. But at the end of the day, what I am saying is that if you're going to say that about certain other fighters, you know, then keep the same energy across the board for the same standards. But it's very clear that they're not going to do that because all their motivations are very racial.
He beats John Ryder. Me personally, I haven't ranked John Ryder like a lot of people have ranked. And I think Munguia has the size, he has the durability, he has the height, and he really has the you know, John Ryder's coming off back-to-back pretty much tough fights against Mexican fighters. So I know Munguia's coming off a tough fight, but he had a little bit longer to recover, and he won his fight versus John Ryder actually lost his fight. So all in all, Jaime Munguia gets it done. Will he fight Canelo next? We'll see. Now, I'm not even mad at Golden Boy. I'm not even mad at Jaime Munguia. They're doing what they're supposed to be doing. But Canelo's going to look crazy. And if you want to know why I believe Canelo is going to look crazy if he fights, then stay tuned to the rest of this video. Now, a word from one of the channel's sponsors. Are you tired of Jaime Munguia? Because I distinctly remember what Canelo says. Now, a lot of people, they say, oh, Canelo, he's popular, I love him, and he's the face of boxing. So they believe that Canelo is somehow above it. He's above criticism. He's above any kind of conversation where you're not glazing and just right? They all...
Listen, and I agree with Mr. Boxing Ego about that, and I have a great amount of respect for Canelo. I think that Canelo has proven to me that he's already been proven as an all-time great fighter. But to me, it doesn't matter what you've accomplished. As long as you're looked at as debatably in the prime of your career, or as long as you're competing, then you always have something to prove. And you're always going to have to try to win and always be against that of the top contenders. You know, none of this stupid ass, you know, LeBron James bullshit where like in the NBA he says, oh, I've done everything, you know, and anything from here is just a cherry on top and all sort of stuff. You know, and you can look at it that way, but oftentimes when fighters or when people say that, it's oftentimes an excuse because they know they're not going to win anymore, or they understand that, you know, their time is pretty much over.
Like some of the people, some of the Canelo fans are so ridiculous. They only want you to say pleasantries and niceties about...
I agree, and you're pretty much the exact same way about that of Gervonta Tank Davis and Deontay Wilder and that of Errol Spence Jr. So I don't completely disagree with you, Mr. Boxing Ego, but let's also keep the same energy here. Because when, you know, Gervonta Tank Davis was fighting Isaac, one-dimensional fighter Cruz, you know, what were you saying? That, oh, the haters are going to be mad at this and all sort of stuff. Right, but who the fuck wants to see that fight? Like, at least against, you know, with Canelo and Jaime Munguia, I could at least see someone of the appeal. It's not really the main fight that I would want to see. But at the end of the day, it's like, I can somewhat see the appeal. At least Jaime Munguia is a champion. He's an undefeated fighter when it comes down to it. And it's Mexico versus Mexico. And Jaime Munguia has somewhat of an entertaining style, you know, and he has some power, you know. But when it comes down to it, it's like Gervonta Tank Davis against Isaac Pitbull Cruz and Mario Barrios. I mean, don't get me wrong. They're decent athletes. They're not the worst, you know, guys that I've seen. But they're certainly not A-grade level fighters. And on top of that, they were never champions when Gervonta Tank Davis had fought them. And no, I do not count regular titles or interim titles as champions.
Canelo Alvarez. Listen, Canelo's a great fighter, but that doesn't mean he's absolved of any guilt or any wrongdoing or his...
Agreed 100%, Mr. Boxing Ego, and you should think the same exact way about your boys Errol Spence Jr., Deontay Wilder, and Gervonta Tank Davis.
Performance can't be criticized, or him fighting small Jermell Charlo, who's a 154-pounder. Like,
right, but Jermell Charlo could easily make 160 pounds. There's a multitude of fighters that have said that, and when you take a look at Jermell Charlo, he's not quite as girthy as what Canelo Alvarez is, but combined with the height and the size that he had, that really was not as big of a weight advantage as what many people were trying to make it out to be. Like I said, Canelo Alvarez, people keep trying to make this about, you know, oh, Canelo Alvarez, he's just huge. Canelo Alvarez is a guy, and I keep telling people this, and people don't believe me. There are fighters that if you give them the opportunity, or that, you know, they're bigger than Canelo Alvarez. Andrade was 190-something pounds in that fight against that of David Benavidez. You know, he got knocked out in 6 rounds, but yet none of these channels criticized Demetrius Andrade the same way that they like to criticize Canelo Alvarez. You know, Jermell Charlo rehydrated to the same weight or about the same weight as Canelo Alvarez did. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that that's always his most natural healthy weight, but it's clear that Jermell Charlo could easily fight at 160 if he wanted to. And I've already stated this. Canelo's not really a natural 168-pounder anyway. So all this other bullshit about, oh, how small Jermell Charlo was, that's not why he lost that fight. Jermell Charlo lost that fight because, yes, he's a bit smaller in terms of the girth, but in terms of the skill set, it's also not even close. Not even in the same room.
I'm going to analyze all those things on my channel. That's the beauty of YouTube. But the bone I have to pick with Canelo, if and should he pick Munguia, is because you got a guy waiting in the wings like David Benavidez, who's with PBC.
And isn't it also interesting, folks? Isn't it also interesting, once again, that Jermell Charlo was apparently top 5 pound per pound on so many of these LDBC and new media lists, you know, but Canelo defeats him, you know, and there was even some lists like Champside debating that Jermell was #1 pound per pound, but yet the LDBC and new media, they just can't have Canelo Alvarez on their top 10 pound per pound list, you know, ever since that loss to Dimitri Bivol. Isn't that interesting?
You would rather go fight a company that you left and that currently has Jaime Munguia, who has a promoter that you don't particularly like, Oscar De La Hoya. Man, he looked crazy. That weight cut was whooping him. That weight cut was whooping him. So you have Oscar, who, let's just be real, he doesn't have a great relationship with Canelo. And since the split, since Canelo left to greener pastures, he hasn't looked back and he hasn't said anything good about Oscar De La Hoya. So why on earth would you...
Right, and what really is there good to say about Oscar De La Hoya? That's why, you know, it's no offense against Oscar, but it's clear that Oscar just has a little bit too many demons on him at this point. And when I say demons, I'm not necessarily saying that he's always a bad person necessarily, but it's clear that he's got some drug problems. He's got some cocaine and major drinking problems. And Oscar De La Hoya has even admitted on certain podcasts that he's been miserable ever since retirement. And a lot of these fighters and a lot of these athletes, they are miserable after retirement. Because some of them, you know, they're in pain. I mean, for some of them, that's the reason why, you know, they start getting on drugs. But some of them, their career did not turn out how they wanted to. And they always wonder, you know, what could have been. You know, had I changed this, had I done that, had I, you know, thrown this punch this certain way, had I maybe improved in this area, could I have maybe won this fight? Could I have won this championship? Would that shot have went in? Would I have hit that home run? You know, what would have possibly happened? So unfortunately, a lot of athletes end up torturing themselves, or they just feel useless because they think that they lost their purpose in life, you know. And Oscar De La Hoya, I think, is probably suffering from a multitude of those things, unfortunately, you know. But it is what it is. But, you know, Canelo Alvarez, he's here to make money. And, you know, he's also here to promote possibly that David Benavidez fight, I think, a little bit later on. And Oscar De La Hoya, I think that he realizes that Jaime Munguia, that this is pretty much going to be the best that he's probably ever going to be.
You rather...
So you might as well cash out on him now before he actually loses to someone like that of a Caleb Plant or an Andrade or something like that possibly, and his marketability is just shot to hell.
Make a fight like this with a promoter that you don't even... You're giving them money and giving Jaime Munguia a potential opportunity when you escaped them and you didn't really want to deal with them. Now that you're with PBC, you want to fight Munguia, and then Benavidez is right there, and Samson Lukowicz is right there to make the fight, and that's a meaningful fight. Benavidez has never been beaten in the ring. There's not even a fight where he arguably should.
Well, right, but Jaime Munguia has never been beaten in the ring either. Now, there's been a couple of close calls and some fights where maybe you could say that he debatably was beaten. Like, I believe he fought that one Irish fighter where a lot of people said that, you know, debatably, you know, he should have lost that fight, or he should have lost that fight and it was a poor decision. But the reason why David Benavidez, of course, is a much more intriguing fight is because David Benavidez clearly is a guy that's much more prepared for someone like that of a Canelo. I think that, you know, he's probably more skilled than that of a Jaime Munguia. He's even bigger than what a Jaime Munguia is, and he's just been the fight that everyone's been asking for. So David Benavidez, of course, is the fight that everyone wants to see. This would not be my first pick, but I would understand if this fight ended up happening next. But Canelo is going to have to fight David Benavidez this year.
Have been beaten, but I can think of Munguia fights like the one with Dennis Hogan, where I think he really should have lost. Even the Derevchenko, some people had him.
Yes, that's the guy, I believe, his name, Dennis Hogan, the Irish fighter.
Losing or having a draw. So you rather fight this young, inexperienced, rather than face the Mexican monster, as Mike Tyson calls him. Hi, David Benavidez, he's the Mexican monster. I named him that. He's the guy, he's just ferocious. I want his heart. I want his children. I want to eat his kids. Praise be to Allah. Right? Mike Tyson named him the Mexican monster. You out, he's been dazzling. He's off his career best performance, most people would probably say, against Demetrius Boo Boo Andrade, who also called you out.
And I'm also going to have to do a video about Demetrius Andrade very soon. I may even release it today because I've seen a video that, you know, I think was a little bit interesting. And that Demetrius Andrade, it's like he's really in a very shit position. Like I said, you know, it was extremely important for him to try, you know, and win that David Benavidez fight, because if he did not win that David Benavidez fight, his career was basically over. But at least there might have been a little bit more salvageable, you know, had he been, you know, probably, you know, been very competitive or stopped later on in the fight. But the fact that after those first 2 rounds, he pretty much lost every single ounce of stamina after the first 2.5 rounds, and he quit on his stool after the first 6 rounds. I mean, that just didn't look good on him at all. I mean, even if you want to fight Canelo or Golovkin now, I mean, they basically have an excuse not to fight you. Why would they fight you after a performance like that? They already weren't interested in fighting you before, you know, because they probably didn't think that you brought enough to the table in terms of the amount that, you know, you would bring for them in terms of earning, maybe a little bit too much risk for the reward. They're definitely not going to fight you now. So in terms of Andrade, it's like, where do you go from here?
Oh, and instead of looking that direction, you're looking at Munguia, who there's inherent obstacles and sides of the street. You don't particularly like De La Hoya. And now we're talking about that. So I'll wait and see to see who Canelo picks. But it's very weird if he picks Munguia. And finally, as I
I don't think it's really weird. I just think overall that it probably is meant for a setup, and I think that Canelo once again is trying to get another big paycheck and trying to get a little bit more experience before finally trying to approach that dragon and slay the dragon once again. Just in my personal view, I actually don't mind this fight. I think it'd be particularly interesting. Do I, of course, think that it's as good as the David Benavidez fight? No. But, you know, at the end of the day, it would be an interesting fight as long as I know that the David Benavidez fight would happen next. And Canelo is going to have to do that. Because if he doesn't fight David Benavidez later on this year, then that, in my view, is going to be a duck.
In the beginning of this video, another reason why that's insanely weird is Benavidez is half Mexican, half Ecuadorian. And you previously said you didn't want to who shares the same flag as you. So now all of a sudden you want to fight someone with the same flag, huh? So you previously said guys.
And I certainly, you know, agree with Mr. Boxing Ego there. You know, so once again, if you're going to be fighting Jaime Munguia, you have to be willing to step in the ring with David Benavidez, at least very soon. At least, you know, if you decide to keep holding on to those 168-pound titles. And I think that Canelo, that, you know, I think that had he decided not to fight David Benavidez a while ago, I don't think that he would still keep holding on to those 168-pound titles. I think that he plans to fight David Benavidez. I just don't think that it's going to be his next fight. I think it's going to be one of his next two, or excuse me, one of his next three.
I always say this. I show that video and put whatever you want. When I say I don't want to fight Mexican, it's because I represent Mexico. But I don't care. I'll fight anybody, and I'll fight my entire life anybody, right? You've been called out. Look, you got Malignaggi calling you out. He says he won't fight Mexicans, but he fights Chavez Jr. Canelo's inconsistencies. Why does he refuse to fight Mexican boxers, but he's done it before? Right? And then now, again, you would rather fight a full-blooded Mexican in Jaime Munguia with a promoter that you're at odds with, rather than a half Mexican that's on the same side, Korean fighter, and David Benavidez. So we know what time it is. Drop your thoughts in the comment section. Subscribe for the boxing news. Best in the business, and it's not even close.
But anyways, that's pretty much about it for this video. I just thought that I would kind of talk about that. And I do agree with some of the points that Mr. Ego is bringing up here. In that if you are willing to fight Jaime Munguia within your next fight, then you have to be willing to fight David Benavidez sometime within your next couple of fights. You know, probably, in my view, later on this year. But if not later on this year, then at the very most, you know, early on, you know, next year. You have to do it, in my view, either later on this year or early on next year. And if he even doesn't do it this year, he's going to get a lot of deserved criticism because there's no other fight that anyone else wants to see right now other than the David Benavidez fight. You are holding on to the belts, and on top of that, he is the main contender and the main monster that everyone keeps talking about. So, of course, we all want to see the fight, including myself. So it's going to be very interesting. But once again, Canelo has always shown me in the past that he's usually willing to get in the ring with anybody. So like I said, before I do any major criticizing, you know, I'm going to kind of wait and see what Canelo decides. Because he's always kind of gotten in the ring with the opponents that I always thought that he needed to. Canelo has always shown me that in the past. So we'll see what happens. But anyways, that would be a great fight. It'd be an interesting fight between himself and Jaime Munguia. I don't think, of course, it would be as good or as great as that of, you know, the David Benavidez matchup, of course. But it still would be very interesting nonetheless. Two Mexican fighters. Jaime Munguia, you know, decent amount of power. If he does well against John Ryder, is going to hype up the fight even more. Be very particularly interesting. And, of course, Canelo could possibly claim that he has another A-minus level name on his resume. If you wanted to. If you wanted to claim Jaime Munguia as a B-plus level fighter, I get it. But, you know, one could say maybe A-minus. It's up to you. But anyways, that's pretty much about it for today. I just thought that I would talk about that. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'll talk to y'all later.